This is a brief video to show how I teach the anatomy of the scapula and of the rotator cuff using both dried bone specimens and the paint drawing program that you can find on any Microsoft computer. What I do first is I have the medical students get a dried bone specimen. Here's an example right here. Obviously, this is a picture that I took from Wikipedia. And then what I have them do is to palpate those structures that you can see on the dried bone specimen. So the first thing I do is I have them palpate the coracoid process, which is this structure right here labeled number 3. The way that I do that is I have them feel along their clavicle and feel the finger-like projection that is the coracoid process just below the clavicle. Then I have them continue feeling along their clavicle until they get to the acromion process, which obviously isn't part of the clavicle but is just lateral to the clavicle. Next, what I have them do is I have them slide their fingers back along the acromion until it turns into the scapular spine, which is located right here. That way they can very easily remind themselves where these structures are. They know that the spine is a posteriorly located structure because they can palpate it posteriorly, and they know that the coracoid process is an anterior structure because they can palpate it anteriorly. Then I have them look down the barrel of the glenoid. This is the glenoid process right here. And what we do next is we draw some of these structures in a very simple way, and then we add the muscles of the rotator cuff. So I'll go ahead and show how I do that. Like I said, I use Microsoft Paint, and the orientation here is going to be the opposite that we just looked at, and I'm going to draw it in very, very, very simple terms. First thing I do is just draw the glenoid. The glenoid is relatively complicated, but I just draw it as a simple circle because we're not looking to be Leonardo da Vinci here or Michelangelo. We're just trying to get sort of an intuitive feel for the way that the scapula looks. So that's looking right down the barrel of the glenoid. That's the same, eventually is going to be the same view as this right here. Okay, then I draw the blade of the scapula, and I'm not trying to do anything fancy here. I just draw a straight line coming down from the glenoid process. Next, I draw the coracoid, which is that little finger-like hook that's directed anteriorly. And finally, I draw the scapular spine and the acromion process. So we're basically looking right down the barrel of the scapula here, the glenoid process rather. And hopefully it looks something like this. Obviously, I flipped it around because that's how I draw it best. Then we're going to add some muscles. And these muscles are relatively easy to add. The muscle that's above the scapular spine, which is right here, that's going to be the supraspinatus muscle. So that's pretty easy to add. The next muscle that we'll add is the infraspinatus muscle, and that's just going to be below the scapular spine. We don't need to be perfect here. Again, we're not going for Sistine Chapel or anything here. We're just trying to have all of our students do this drawing so that they understand this material in a really intuitive way. And the last muscle that's located on the back of the scapula that we're going to draw is the Teres Minor. So those are our 3 posteriorly located muscles of the rotator cuff that arise from the scapula. And there's a mnemonic for the muscles of the rotator cuff, SITS, S-I-T-S. And the first 3 of those muscles, the supraspinatus, the infraspinatus, and the Teres Minor, arise from the back of the scapula, and they attach to the greater tuberosity. Final muscle is the subscapularis muscle, which is located anteriorly. We're going to go ahead and draw that in also. And the subscapularis muscle is eventually going to turn into a tendon and is going to attach to the lesser tuberosity. And basically this, in brief, is how I teach medical students about the scapula and about the rotator cuff. One last thing I emphasize to the students is that the supraspinatus muscle is particularly vulnerable, or the supraspinatus tendon is particularly vulnerable to being torn because it lives underneath the acromion. It's kind of a bad neighborhood because the acromion process can get spurs that hang down from the acromion and from the AC joint, and they can dig into the supraspinatus tendon and can damage the supraspinatus tendon hair. Thank you for listening.